Hello, and welcome to the first of 3 videos on the sexual development of children, and children with sexual behavior problems. This first video explains why we need to be concerned about sexual development, and how experts determine what healthy sexual development is. So first, why should we be concerned about sexual development among children? Well, it sure isn't for the same reasons we focus on other kinds of development. After all, when it comes to physical, emotional, social, cognitive, and artistic development, we want to know how best to guide children as they interact with each other, practice, and develop their capabilities. But we certainly don't want them to interact sexually, or practice and develop their sexual capabilities. That's why today's experts, rather than being anthropological or developmental researchers, are sex abuse therapists who focus on controlling children's sexual behavior. They became prominent about 30 years ago when they discovered children doing sexual things with each other that they knew were just wrong. It's a bit like domestic violence therapists being seen as experts on physical development of children. That would be strange, but let me assure you, it's perfectly reasonable when it comes to sexual development. Never mind those researchers who found evidence that sexual development is like other forms of development. They discovered that children in all societies throughout the world have a natural inclination to do a lot of sexual things, sometimes much more extensive and advanced than we'd like to believe, and are not necessarily harmed by them. They found that children tend to pass on their sexual knowledge by interacting sexually with each other, just like with other things in life. They even observed that some societies allowed children to do this. And they found evidence that learning and practicing sexual behavior in childhood might lead to positive adjustment and responsible sexual behavior in adulthood. But now wait a minute, they couldn't have been right. After all, they lived back in the 1970s and earlier. Today's experts know better. These experts realize that it's only normal for a child to teach something new to another child if it's not sexual. But if it is sexual, then it must be molestation, because sex is different. It just is. And once one child is molested, he becomes a molester himself, continuing the cycle of abuse. These children are a lot like vampires. The technical name for them is sexually reactive children. So today's experts know that, unlike in other areas of development, when it comes to sexuality, anything more than minimal knowledge and behavior is a sign that the child has been abused, is abusing others, or will come dangerously close to doing so. So we label such behavior with precise scientific terms like problematic, disturbing, inappropriate, intrusive, and aggressive. We lump these children together with those who are sexually coercive, and give them all scary objective names like children who molest, child perpetrators, and children with sexual behavior problems. Of course, this is all scientifically accurate, therapeutically effective, and ethically acceptable. So, unlike the case with other forms of development, our reason for needing to understand sexual development is so that we can minimize and control children's behavior so they do not become dreaded monsters. Now, you may be wondering if there is research that confirms this current correct view of normal sexual behavior. Of course. It's been conducted by the therapists who already knew what good and bad behavior was. To determine normal sexual behavior of children, they interviewed parents and teachers of children who hadn't been molested. The molested ones, of course, were identified by their abnormal sexual behavior and removed from the studies. If you think the logic here is circular, then you're thinking too much. The only thing circular is the cycle of abuse, which you'll perpetuate if you dare question the truth. Another reason this research is so good is the fact that parents and teachers are accurately aware of all of their children's sexual behavior. They know they aren't doing anything inappropriate like the kids in those low-class neighborhoods or those other cultures. Think about it. When you were a child, I'm sure your parents and teachers knew. You weren't doing anything inappropriate with your friends in the restroom, down in the basement, in the garage, or out in the woods. So today's superior research serves its proper function of confirming what we already knew, that sexual behavior is very different from other kinds of behavior. Anything beyond minimal or non-existent behavior is abnormal and dangerous. But there's something more important than research anyway. As expert Timothy Kahn says, unhealthy behavior is behavior that violates the law, or rules. The laws are made by politicians, of course, and the rules are made by the therapists. The politicians and therapists decide what's healthy, because they know more about child sexual development than developmental and anthropological researchers. That's why, as one researcher has written, the field of child development has largely ignored the issue of sexuality. And why the American Psychiatric Association's official list of mental disorders does not include a single childhood sexual disorder, even though it extensively lists childhood disorders and adult sexual disorders. Well, obviously sexual misbehavior by children is not a real disorder. It's just something that's plain wrong, or inappropriate. As you'll see in the third video, treatment is triggered when a child violates the law or rule, not when a child is diagnosed with a disorder. Because there are no diagnoses. Allowing politicians to define healthy development is in the tradition of American local control. This way, healthy sexual development can vary from place to place, depending on the law and on people's moral sensibilities. And because the law is involved, we can be especially effective in curing unhealthy development by prosecuting the unhealthy children. In about 60% of all states, children under 14 who engage in any sexual activity with peers are sex criminals and therefore sexually unhealthy. Then they get treatment. These children by law may be called child molesters, sexual abusers, and sexual assaulters. In some states, they are even put on public registries. Public shaming is a particularly effective way to encourage healthy development. Now, if the old researchers were right, the majority of American children could be abnormal sex criminals, but I'm sure they're wrong. This is probably enough for this video. To sum up, sexual development is very different from any other aspect of child development. The goal is solely to minimize behavior and knowledge, to prevent a terrifying abnormality, and this abnormality is defined by politicians and therapists based on our common sense knowledge that children shouldn't behave sexually. You'll want to watch the next video to learn what kinds of perverted, inappropriate, things the abnormal children do, and how scary they really are. And watch the third video to see how we save these children from their descent into hell.